right. Welcome everyone to our first episode of The Context. I am super excited to be here. My name's Shannon Williams. I am one of the founders of a company called Acorn. I'm here with my co-founder, Darren. Darren, you want to say hi?
Hello, everyone. I'm here.
Yeah, this is The Context is a new thing we're starting. It's really, it came out of the MCP Dev Summit that we ran last week. And, it is about the MCP community and the weekly live stream or semi-weekly live stream that we're putting together to invite people who are working on interesting things, have interesting presentations to share, to come talk about what they're doing in the MCP community, share new products, share new projects, share some best practices, and everything and anything in between. So we've got a couple great presentations today, and we'll get to those in just a second. But first, I wanted to just kind of thank everyone who came out last week for the first MCP Dev Summit. It was hosted in San Francisco. We had an incredible group of presenters, an incredible group of attendees, a day of presentations on where the MCP project is right now, where it's going, best practices for adopting it in an enterprise, best practices for securing it, best practices for building MCP servers and running them on public clouds, best practices for running them as microservices or on Lambda. I mean, so many awesome discussions. So I know everyone on the call was there. It was a really fun event, and one of the cool things about it is we had so many people submit talks, like these incredible talks to present, and that's really where the idea for this live streams came from, is that we received so many talks that we were like, well, we can't fit them all into one single track day conference. Let's bring those speakers to the web and incorporate them into the website for the event. And so today is the first episode of this live stream. We're going to be having a couple presentations today, but we're going to be doing this every week for at least a few weeks with multiple presenters. So you can see some of the talks that we have coming up, from people like Smithery and Shopify and FastN and DataStax, who are all have some really cool and interesting use cases for MCP that they want to talk. We're also open to people who want to present and join us. So if you're working on something in the MCP ecosystem, if you've added support for MCP, if you've built a really cool MCP, if you think you've got an awesome, list of the 10 best MCPs for somebody to use, submit a talk. You can, we'll put a link in the recording of this as well, but you can also just scan the QR code, fill out the form, and we'll have some, hopefully we'll be able to keep going with this as we get people interested in presenting new things they're doing in the community. So today's format is going to be really, I think, really fun. We're going to have relatively quick talks. These talks are ideally 20 minutes or less. We are going to be pretty tight on time, so we're going to try not to run long on this, as live streams tend to. So we'll be pretty good about stopping. And we'll be taking questions at the end of each talk. So if you have questions and you're following along with us on X or LinkedIn or YouTube, just feel free to ask your questions there. And if not, Darren and I will have some questions as well, I'm sure, for our presenters. And hopefully we can get a really good group of people participating in the event. So let's get started. Today we have two talks coming. Our first talk is by Nick Taylor, who's a developer advocate over at Pomerium. He's going to talk about access for building access control policies and zero trust in the world of MCPs. And then after Nick's talk, we're going to have Matthew Lenhard, who's the CTO over at MCP Evals, and he's got a great talk. It's all about how to evaluate how many tools and what tools you're giving to your agents when you start to add more and more MCPs, and those MCPs have more and more capabilities within them. There's lots of challenges that arise there. He's going to walk us through that in a little bit. So with all that, I think we're ready to get started. Nick, are you ready to go?
Yeah, excited to be here. Thanks again for having me, Shannon and Darren.
Awesome, buddy. We'll take it away. We've got your slides up, and the floor is yours.
Cool. Yeah, like Shannon said, we're going to be talking about access in the age of Agentic. So maybe a little clickbaity, the title, who knows? But regardless, we'll keep going. Yeah, so just a quick bit about me. Like Shannon said, I'm a dev advocate over at Pomerium, hailing from Montreal. These are all the places you can find me. Bit of my background real quick. I've been traditionally a web dev, mainly app developer, and I'm now in the infra security space. So I'm still pretty fresh here. So just to give you a bit of context. So what are we going to cover? We're going to talk about what zero trust security is. I know when I still talk to some people, they're not sure what it is. So I think it's good to cover that. And then we're going to just cover, what is MCP briefly. I think most of the people joining here will probably know, but for folks who might not have been at the conference or just new to it, be good to cover that. And then we'll just kind of dig into zero trust with MCP. And then we'll just kind of wrap things up with a demo. So what is zero trust security? So it's a security model that assumes no implicit trust, not even inside your network, unlike traditional security where it relied on perimeter-based access. Like once you're in, you were trusted, never questioned again. But with the rise of like remote work, SaaS, and microservices, that broke that whole model. And zero trust enforces authentication and authorization for literally every request. And the other key point about it is context matters. And just a little side note about the history of this, Google is the one that actually started zero security. There's some papers I have linked in the resources called the Beyond Corp papers. This all started due to a breach in, I think it was the 2010s at Google. So that's how this all came about. So let's just talk about the core principles of zero trust. So there's strong identity verification. Least privilege is always on the table. It's continuous authorization and verification. And there's always this context-aware policy enforcement. And there's never any implicit trust. You always have to check. And if you put all that together, you get something that's called an identity-aware proxy. It's a core building block of zero trust. It enforces all the things I mentioned, basically. And I'll just give you a nice little picture here. But the TLDR is whether it doesn't matter where the user is coming from, whether it's in an office, in some internal network or somebody on the outside. You're always going through this identity-aware proxy. And in there, you basically are wired up to an identity provider, so like the classics like GitHub or Google. It could be your own, a lot of devs like, what is it, Cloak, the name's escaping me. But you also have a policy engine, and all those things together evaluate, can you access something internally? And that's how the request gets forwarded. The interesting thing about the policy engine is you can have some basic stuff like, like, is it in this domain and stuff, but you can add more dynamic stuff too, like, for example, an on-call roster, device posture, etc. So it's kind of, build your own policy, but it's also uniform security. And I will mention this isn't specific to MCP or agentic access. Like this is something that secures basically pretty much any internal apps you want to. So let's talk about from human access to agentic access. So, traditional systems assumed users with login portals, but now, you've got LLMs, automated things, dev tools, and these things act on your behalf, but with different risks. So we needed a standard way to expose them securely. And then that brings us to MCP. So the model context protocol, I'm not going to go into it too much because we just had a conference. You can check out the resources here. But it's really like a standard interface for tools that LLM agents can use to do actions or get additional context. They can also be clients and servers in MCP. And so TLDR about MCP clients, think of something like Claude or Goose. Angie Jones gave a great talk from Block last week about how they're using MCP, and Goose got a lot of shout outs. VS Code is another one. It's new in their Insiders edition. They support remote MCPs now. And the other interesting thing is an MCP server can also be an MCP client. So let's talk about MCP security best practices. I'm not going to go into the whole paper. There's a link to the blog post here and in the resources, but some of the takeaways are, place MCP servers behind a proxy, enforce authentication. You want to validate those tokens for the audience and scopes. You want to prevent token pass-through, preserve user content, and you really want to audit as much as possible. And while the MCP security best practices don't explicitly say zero trust in the on that page in the docs, a lot of those principles they outline strongly align with zero trust concepts. So why zero trust for MCP? Well, kind of alluded to it a little bit by the last slide, but OAuth is on the scene now in MCP, which is great. But that alone can't enforce like device trust or session-based policies. And also, VPNs don't work well with hosted LLMs like Claude or ChatGPT. MCP tool access is sensitive systems potentially, so you need a per request policy potentially. And zero trust gives you access control before the request ever reaches your service. So if you don't get in, you're blocked at the proxy. You never even hit the internal network. And so what does zero trust enable? So you get that login via your identity provider. You also get, based on the policies, you can have, allow or deny access, based on all kinds of things, group, device posture, third-party data, like I mentioned, like an on-call, like your pager duty schedule, etc. And also, it only exposes what's needed to who needs it. And we'll talk briefly about just VPNs. They break external MCP use. So like, for example, if your tools require a VPN and you expose an MCP server to Claude or ChatGPT, those hosted LLMs can't connect to your VPNs. Basically, the server URLs always have to be publicly accessible to be reachable. If you had your own MCP client and MCP servers within your own network, maybe not an issue, but I think a lot of people are trying to wire up these MCP servers to all kinds of things like IDEs and stuff like ChatGPT and Claude. Let's talk about OAuth real quick. So the spec got updated recently, and I believe this is rolling out in the SDKs. I'm not sure if it's in there yet or not, but OAuth brings standard login flow and token handling. You get scope bearer token support, which improves security, but OAuth alone just answers what can you do. It doesn't answer should you be doing this right now, for example. And that's kind of where zero trust enters the scene. So, you got your identity, you got the zero trust evaluating who, what, when, where, and why. Again, talking about context, so device posture, IP, time of day, basically anything that your security posture decides to put in place can be applied to this. Aside from that, you get visibility. If everything's kind of going through this proxy, you're able to audit what's going on in there. I'm going to talk briefly about Pomerium where I work. We're open core, and so everything I talked about so far pertains to zero trust. Pomerium is a zero trust security-based product, but there's some things that we're doing that aren't necessarily part of zero trust in general. So this is more for people looking to build MCP servers or MCP clients. Again, this is all open source. So it's kind of nice if you're an MCP server developer, there's no need to implement OAuth 2.1. That gets handled by Pomerium. There's no token storage, which is kind of nice because you don't want to potentially expose all those tokens to the client consuming them. There's just the validated and signed JOT that we have, and you get your identity and policy enforced just on every request, just like anything that you'd be using in zero trust, which is really nice. And I'll just talk briefly. So like in an identity-aware proxy, you have routes. So you're going like from somewhere to somewhere. And the nice thing is in terms of the not having to build out the whole OAuth 2.1 stuff with your servers is you just have to configure a client ID and a client secret, and you're pretty much good to go. let's move along here. And yeah, for the MCP client developers, it's stateless and simple. You pass a short-lived bearer token, works for Claude, ChatGPT, or internal tools. And like I said, no upstream tokens exposed to clients. And the clients don't have to manage the auth, like I said, which is kind of nice. These are general benefits again. I won't necessarily go through all of them, but these are more just zero trust in general. And here's some resources. And just going to do a quick time check. I think I did what I did, which is I talked pretty quickly, but we're going to just do a quick demo here. So I'm logging in with our Authenticate service, but like this can be literally any identity provider. So this week I was working on just creating basically like a Claude or ChatGPT like experience. So I'm going to log in here and bad request. Great. Well, it's a demo. You know, that's what happens. Let me try this again. Maybe let's log out. Oh, there we go. Something went wonky. I'll zoom in here, but basically what happened there was the MCP client that you're looking at right now, this is being secured by Pomerium. So I log in, I get that short-lived token, and now I can, if we come over to settings, like I have a, for anybody that's been in the game for quite a while, you're probably familiar with the Northwind database. So we can look at there. This is just like our kind of like fake internal data. So these are the tools I have available. And the nice thing is, like if I disconnect here, just going to reconnect. Now, that whole flow to log into that MCP server wasn't necessary because, or at least visually seeing it, because it's the same JOT that is securing the MCP client. It's securing the MCP server as well. And then if I just come back to the chat here, and then I say something like, let me go off screen for a second here, but just going to go get a query. And then I think we're pretty much at time after I demo this. So I think we're doing okay. Queries, here we go. So I'm just going to say, pull data from our distribution of products by supplier in countries in Europe only and generate a pie chart. The pie chart might not generate, but you can see here it's calling the tool. Tools in progress. It's telling you what it's going to do. And again, this has been secured as well. The MCP server, it's secured with Pomerium as well as this. Okay, it's still thinking here. Cool, there we go. So I don't have it doing pie charts yet, but basically this is live data coming from the Northwind database, aka our fake internal product database. And you can see like we're getting the real data back, and I'm not going to run some Python right now, but we could get it like that. So that's just kind of like a quick demo. There's other things we're going to be doing with this, but that's kind of essentially it. And I think we're pretty good for time at this point, Shannon.
Awesome, Nick. Thanks for sharing all that and going through a quick demo. I've added everyone back to the screen. So help me understand this. So Pomerium is open source. The product has a commercial version. What is entailed in setting this up? So like I have, you know, dozens of MCP servers. Am I modifying the MCP server? Am I running some kind of a sidecar? Like how am I guess I'm missing the question of like, I'm the admin and I need to build out sort of a security framework and apply that to my organization's MCPs. What am I doing?
Yeah, so the first thing is you can, you know, wire up your IDP, whatever that is. This is all just configuration. In the open source, it's all just like a config.yaml. If you want to create a server, there's building the server itself, like that one that you saw, that's currently being used with the Go SDK for MCP. And you deploy that wherever, like, because the one thing about the identity aware proxy is that sits at your network's edge. So it's not something cloud hosts. It's something you always host wherever you have your internal apps. So it's literally in the same network. And from there, you basically, I'll oversimplify it, but basically you generate, you create your route. So like, you know, mysecuremcp.shannon.com, and that points to some internal app that, you know, is on your network. So it's like the from route's the publicly facing URL, and then the to route is like where it really is in your network. And all the security is handled at the identity aware proxy level. You don't have to manage that in the application. And I mean, obviously you get claims and stuff in there that you can use to determine certain things in the app. But and the other thing I'll mention is this isn't just for MCP. Like we've been doing this for a while for just apps in general. It's just it fits well with MCP because we're a layer 7 proxy. So, you know, we're at the request level. It just really pairs nicely. And I've been working in open source professionally since like 2020. So that's another reason why one of the reasons why I decided to join here, the fact that it's open core, where you get pretty much all this stuff. Like none of this MCP stuff is gated by enterprise at the moment. So
yeah, it's curious. So because Shannon was asking kind of like on the admin side. So it's like as somebody who's developing an MCP server and I want to add all the OAuth crap and everything, because whatever, it's also confusing. Like what is if I wanted to create my MCP server and I wanted to be secured in this way, like what does the MCP server developer actually have to do? Is there anything you code change or yeah?
Well, you could build your I haven't built this particular server. My coworker Dennis had, but basically, like I said, he just leveraged the SDK to build out the MCP server, and then from there, like say you have something upstream, like say you create an MCP server with like GitHub, you know, to access things. You know, you'd probably, in the case of GitHub, you'd go create a GitHub app, get your client secret, client ID, and then that's literally just config that you put in the route and under this MCP section. And then we handle all that OAuth flow. And basically what happens is like from the MCP client that is connected to that particular server, all it ever gets is that short-lived jot that comes from Pomerium, and Pomerium internally will it's basically like a lookup table of like, okay, you know, I'll oversimplify it, but this is Nick logged in, he's OAuth into GitHub, so his tokens are like stored in his little bucket, for example. And so like we always manage those. So those, from a security standpoint, you're never exposing your client IDs or your secrets to the actual MCP client.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, that's one of the things I've liked so much about the way the MCP is going right now is like all of this kind of security stuff, like the OAuth and whatnot, is all being built into kind of like, it's either the clients or the SDKs, and none of this burden is really pushed onto the app developers. So it's like, to implement this stuff is typically, it's like, well, just for the most part, just write an MCP server, and all of the kind of like the SDKs and the framework just kind of all takes care of it. I've been pretty happy with all the different demos I've seen of the OAuth stuff, where it's like because me as a developer, like I just honestly don't want to care about any of this stuff. It's like I'll just write my cool little Python or JavaScript or whatever. And it all just kind of magically happy, and you know, happens for you, and then the enterprise people can configure all the crap they want. You know? Yeah,
and then the only other thing I'd say is like, even if you literally did not care about security, it's just, this removes a lot of burden of building an MCP server, and if you did use it, you just end up getting really good security with it too. So
yeah, there was a great one of the talks in MCP session. There's a great comment about like we had this weird intersection where we can actually build things that are more secure and have a better user experience, which almost never happens.
Yeah.
So it's like,
they're always at odds typically. Yeah.
Awesome.
Nice.
Well, Nick, thank you so much. Great presentation. All right, let's give the floor over to Matt.
Thanks, Shannon. Yeah, that was it was an awesome talk. I think it's a really exciting time to be building overall in MCP. I don't think I've fell in love with the technology like I have with MCP, just because the possibilities are really endless. And that kind of takes me into like what I'll be talking about today. So this is a problem that I faced myself. I started out with MCP by building a gateway. I then built a server, started working on a client, and one of the biggest issues I ran into was tool call selection. So what happens when you load in a ton of tools, and how do you ensure that the right tool is being called? So I'm sure, as many people know, like the more tools you're running, the worse the results generally are. And that's because of how much you're stuffing into the context window. And so, say, for example, you're using Claude to run your MCP servers. The system prompt alone in Claude is 24,000 tokens. So that's already eating up a giant portion of the context window. I then went ahead and I pulled like about 8,000 MCP servers from Glamma, and I calculated the token length of all of the tools. And on average, each tool call or each tool description was about 30 tokens. And so we're kind of this interesting dilemma where if you want to improve tool call selection, you need to basically have more comprehensive tool descriptions. Yet on the other hand, like the more in-depth your tool descriptions are, the more tools you're loading, um, the worst the worse tool call selection is, and the more issues you're going to run into with the context window. Um, and so in order to test this, I wanted to set up an experiment. Like what happens when you load in a bunch of tools? Where does the breaking point seem to be when you're creating a server with a bunch of tools? Um, and so what I set up was basically two servers, one with 60 tools and one with 5 tools. I then created like an evals client to essentially, or an evals package, it's up on GitHub, um, to basically initialize a client, um, load the MCP servers, and then programmatically go through a list of prompts, um, and then afterwards grade which tool was chosen and if it's like the correct tool. So yeah, setting up the client pretty straightforward, basically just using the AI SDK from Vercel, create the transport, servers wherever stdio, and then after that, just like uh, essentially loop through the prompts and sorry, looked like a chat tracking me. Loop through the prompts and call the corresponding tools. The prompt's pretty straightforward. Basically, your standard LLM as a judge, and what it does is it looks at the tool call that came back and grades it if the right tool was selected. Basically returning like an integer. And so to get started, I wanted to show like what happens when the wrong, like how bad can it be, right? So this is an example of the wrong tool being selected on the MCP server with 60 tools. So the prompt was, I like Inception and Interstellar. What movies would you recommend? It came back with the book recommender when it should have chosen the movie recommendation tool. Same thing. I would like to reserve a table for 2 from English to Italian, or translate that. It chose the code translation when it should have chose the language converter. I don't know about everybody else, but I'd prefer if when I ask for something to be translated to English, it wasn't translated to like PHP or Python. And interestingly enough, the smaller server shows the correct tool in both cases. And so, yeah, what does the data essentially look like? So like I said, with the eval prompt, I basically scored it on a scale of 0 to 10, looping through like a few hundred prompts. And the difference was about a score of 1. But what I think is more, or sorry, 0.8. What I think is more interesting is that when it's wrong, it gets it really wrong. And it's going to be very noticeable to the end user, which I think is like our ultimate goal here. Like, how do we build agents and tools that are going to improve like the lives or the processes of the people we're building for. And yeah, when it gets it wrong, it gets it very wrong. And this essentially like scales from here. So 60 tools, like it was about 1 in 10 would, in 1 in 10 prompts, the wrong tool would be chosen. As you add more tools, that scales down to like, I believe it was at like a few hundred tools. We're at, 3 of 10, the wrong prompt is chosen. But again, on the small server, it's near 100% hit rate on the correct tool being chosen. And so I didn't want to spend too much on the problem because, yeah, we all know that if you load too many tools in the context window, you're going to run into issues, right? It's there's a little bit of like common sense there. When there's more choices, it's hard to make a choice. It could be, an MCP client, or it could be, I don't know, me at dinner. When I had too many choices, I make the wrong choice a lot of times as well. But if there's two, generally pick the right one. And there's a bunch of like pretty interesting solutions from people who have basically had to solve this in the wild. And so I'm going to talk through a few of them. They're all companies that have launched pretty big MCP servers. They have a lot of like surface area to cover essentially. And so these are problems that they needed to solve themselves. And what else I think is interesting is that there's been a bunch of different approaches to solve this. The other interesting thing is that most of the solutions are coming from the server side and not the client side. But there's also a lot you could do on the client side. And I'll touch on that after. I just wanted to start with the server side because I think that's what most people are building right now. So Block has this awesome article that I recommend everybody go read called Tools Are Like Onions. And essentially what they've done is kind of created like 3 core tools to start. They have like a discovery tool, a planning tool, and an execution tool. And each of these informs the client or host like how to choose and then execute the correct tool. And so just to like show you the code so you get a better idea, they've got like the get service info tool. Basically, you pass in like the category of like the API you want to call. So like in this example, it's catalog and payments. And then it will return information about like what it can do, like what those can do. And the next step is to then like, based on what's returned, okay, now that we know that what's possible, what are like the parameters needed, what are the validation rules, like what should the response schema look like, or what will the response schema look like. Interestingly enough, there's a PR open on the spec right now to introduce tool response schema. So that should solve some of these issues. It's also why it's so exciting to be building an MCP right now, is because there's so many issues to be solved. But I think like the use cases are so exciting. So even like the solutions that I'm talking about here today, like some of them are making their way into the spec and others are still like works in progress. Yeah, and then the final step is pretty straightforward. It's basically, okay, now that we've retrieved the information, or now that we've seen what tools are possible, retrieved information about like the metadata of those tools, let's go ahead and call the correct tool. Yeah, and so that's like the first approach, is basically this layered approach to tool call selection and execution. Next up is Appify, who I thought had a pretty interesting approach because they have, I want to say it's like 4,000 tools, which basically correspond to like the Appify actors, which are kind of like their, it's like an internal, they're essentially like an API platform where like users can deploy APIs. And so each one of those is a corresponding MCP tool. And How they've decided to handle it is via the tool list change notification. And this is something that I will forewarn everybody, not many clients support yet, but it makes it so that you can dynamically add tools from your server. So, for example, like say you're running an MCP client and you want to use the Appify MCP server, you're building out like a bunch of, I don't know, automation tools. And your user types in, I want to scrape LinkedIn, or I want to scrape LinkedIn and then find those people on GitHub, right? So Appify is going to have scrapers for both of those. So what you can do is you can ping Appify through their Discover Actors tool and say, do you have any, LinkedIn scrapers? They're going to respond back with the LinkedIn scraper. You can then call their add actor tool method, and that will then add that LinkedIn scraper to the MCP server. And so what you're basically able to do is dynamically find and add tools to the MCP server. So you don't have to like load all of these into context at once. Again, this isn't natively supported in like Claude or Cursor or a lot of clients, but if you are building your own host, sorry, it's supported natively by clients, but it's not natively supported by the host. So if you're building like your own host or like client architecture, this is like a really interesting way to solve the problem, because it, again, essentially like takes all of the complexity kind of like out of the equation. GitHub has another approach where they basically have like a CLI flag where you can toggle on and off the which sets of tools you want to use. So, for example, like you can pass in like the exact tool sets that you want to pull. I'm not like as big of a fan of this approach just because it you're doing this like prior to your running the MCP server. The other approach they've taken is with dynamic tool discovery. So that it kind of works similar to Appify, where I encoded like the exact call and go they're using, but basically they're sending this tool list change notification and passing in all the tools. So again, similar approach to Appify. This is currently in beta with GitHub, but it allows you to kind of like dynamically register tools so that you're not overflowing the context window with your tools. And I think like if my hunch is that's kind of where we're going to take things. I think the tool list notification is a pretty good solution to this problem. But what if you're building a host or a client? Like these have all been solutions kind of on the server side. But if you're like me, I'm trying to integrate with I've been building a client that's trying to integrate with all of these publicly available MCP servers. That's one of the benefits of MCP is you get 4,000 integrations out of the box, or however many MCP servers there are now. And you're not going to be able to take advantage of some of these cool things that GitHub and Block and other people are doing because the average person who's building a server isn't implementing these situations because they don't necessarily have to worry about it. And so you have some scenarios where, Cursor, you can only add like 5 MCP servers. There's other hosts or clients where you have to like manually select the server you want, like the user has to manually select it. And again, I don't think that's like a great scenario either. I think we should be dynamically determining which servers apply and then determining which tools apply. And I think that's like ultimately what's best for the user. And yeah, so how does this work? Or like, how could you implement something like this? So I'll take you through some like real kind of like scenarios I've run into, which is basically user types in a prompt like, I want to maybe pull all contributors to this GitHub repo, and then I want to find other GitHub repos they've contributed to, and then I want to pull those stars and then find the person on LinkedIn, right? So there's a bunch of like interconnected steps there. What I found works best is basically you want to prompt to break this larger kind of like workflow into individual steps, and then essentially like try to figure out what servers and tools are going to be necessary for each individual step. That's what I found kind of as like the best um, essentially like results, like when I've run them through like evals or just like even looking at them myself. And the the way I've seen other people doing this is still like kind of pretty new, so there isn't like a ton of solution. Is basically to set up a vector store of all of your available tools. Um, so just like create the embeddings for all of your tools, prompt comes in, and then you're gonna want to do some type of like similarity search on the prompt and the tools, pull back the tools. Something to keep in mind is basically if you're using like all publicly available tools, like you need to embed the server description as well, because there might be a search GitHub tool and or just a search tool on the GitHub MCP server, and there might be a search tool on the YouTube MCP server, but they might not necessarily specify the upstream server name. So make sure you're passing that in alongside your tool call descriptions. And then the other thing you can do is like re-rank the tools upon retrieval. And I'll walk you through like some quick code examples on how to do this. So yeah, essentially all you have to do is when the prompt comes in, create the embeddings and then do the similarity search on the embeddings, pull back the results, and then run them through like a re-ranker like BGE. This might even be overkill in a lot of cases, but if you really want to have the best results, this is the way to do it. Yeah, and so that's kind of like the quick overview of, I think, what people are doing to solve the tool call selection issue, which as as MCP scales, I think is going to is one of the biggest things that needs to be solved, because I'm tired of Claude picking the wrong tool. I'm tired of, I don't like the MCP server limit caps that are in a lot of the clients or hosts. I think in order for this to really take off for people other than engineers, they don't need to know about MCP servers at all. We should be doing all of this on the back end, like without the end user having to toggle anything. They don't need to turn on this server. It should just pull the information for them. And the same thing with agents. Like as we're building out agents, I think figuring out the correct tool for the agent to call is going to be vital. And with the explosion of MCP, we now have access to basically not any API on the internet, but most APIs are now able to be called or proxied through an MCP server in your agent. And so to really like scale this, I think that's one of the big things that needs to be solved is on like the tool call selection. Yeah, and so like what's kind of like next on the radar for like solutions here? I think there's a PR up in the spec for namespacing. There's a PR up in the spec for tool search, and there's been a lot of interesting back and forth there about whether tool search should be in the spec or not. For anybody curious, I'd really recommend reading it. There's a PR up about like pull request schema, and finally there's one up about tracing and like OTel implementation. And yeah, that kind of takes me to the end of the talk. I guess like just to wrap things up, super excited about MCP, all the possibilities it offers. There's never been a better time to be building than right now.
Thanks so much, Matt. That was really cool. And it sounds like a problem you've been working on a lot. I mean, how did you, in addition, beyond just your personal interest in this, how did you start working on sort of the MCP evals project? looks like it's kind of in the same area. Where did that come from?
Yeah, so funny enough, I actually got started building a gateway for, because I just, in order to learn about technology, I kind of have to start hacking around. That's what, my opinion, that's the best way to figure something out. And so I started building like essentially like a proxy or gateway that would proxy request a bunch of different MCP servers. And what I found out pretty quickly was like, why is the wrong tool being chosen? Or like, it just felt like the results were pretty poor a lot of the time. And I couldn't figure out, I wanted to figure out why. And then I started building some like MCP servers myself. And I saw that there really wasn't any good way to do end-to-end testing. Okay, I want to grab trace information on all of these calls. Well, there's not really any solution there. So like I kind of like monkey patched the SDK to figure that out. And yeah, at this point, I'm just building cool things with MCP because the space excites me so much. And kind of see where it takes me. And that's where like a lot of the things I've built so far have come from, just trying to learn, trying to build useful things for problems I've run into myself.
I think it's interesting, like the intersection kind of between kind of the two talks given today, because when you look at dynamic tool, like dynamically looking up tools and whatever, is then what's the intersection between that and authentication? Because then it brings like a whole different thing. Because like all the examples so far have been kind of one MCP server can kind of change what tools are available, but then right now, a lot of the authentication is kind of done at the MCP server level. So it's like what happens when you dynamically change the tools, but then those tools require additional level, authentication to different backend systems or whatnot. Oh.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to see what's being done on the OAuth end, because again, that's also a problem I faced myself. But I don't know, OAuth terrifies me. I've built enough systems similar to that where I don't think I ever want to touch OAuth again. And so I'm hoping that a lot of these people can figure out the OAuth problems so that I don't have to worry about it. It'll make my life a whole lot easier. But yeah, I think there's some interesting things to be solved around like dynamic client registration for OAuth, like so that clients don't have to go sign up at each individual MCP server, get their credentials. I saw there's some pretty interesting things being done there. Again, like we kind of talked about earlier, tool level authorization. I think, yeah, there's a lot of problems to be solved. That's for certain.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Matthew, Nick, thank you both so much for your talks today. This was awesome, and I appreciate all the work you guys put into preparing for this. Just as a reminder for everyone watching, we're going to be back next week. We've got 3 talks next week from FastN, Shopify, and Hurist AI. And like I mentioned earlier, if you'd like to present, if you've got something you're eager to show or some best practices you want to share, scan the QR code and fill out the form and tell us what you want to talk about. We'd love to have you. With that, I want to just say thanks to everyone again for coming, and we'll see you next week.
Take care, everybody.
How you going, guys?